Hi everyone, my name is Malissa Alinor. So to begin, I want to tell you a story about two people. Susan is a Black woman, and when she found out that she was accepted into the top university of her state, she was overjoyed, as any high school senior would be. When one of her teachers found out, he decided to tell her in front of her entire class that the only reason that she was admitted is because the university needed to meet a racial quota. Jerry is a Black man. When he got the call that he was going to be promoted, he was ecstatic. But that excitement quickly soured when one of his white colleagues, who had also wanted the promotion, told him that she would never be promoted because she's a white woman. So Susan and Jerry's stories are real, and they are reflective of the kinds of competency microaggressions that Black professionals report experiencing at work. And so I define competency microaggressions as comments and behaviors directed toward low status groups that reveal low expectations of their abilities, beliefs that workers are affirmative action hires, or surprise when workers demonstrate competency. And so these can also be experienced by other marginalized groups, such as women and disabled people. And so there is a lot of emotional labor involved in handling microaggressions. So, on the one hand, Black people want to avoid being stereotyped as the angry Black person at work. So, when they deal with microaggression, they tend to use emotional restraint and find ways to react in a more professional way. However, on the other hand, responding in a way that does not show negative emotion can also end up sustaining racial inequality, which ends up in there being a double bind where Black workers may end up being harmed by the way they respond to competency microaggressions, no matter how they choose to react. And so I wanted to better understand this puzzle by finding out how microaggressions are affecting Black people in real time. In particular, I looked at the kinds of comments they make in response, the emotions that they report feeling, and then are they willing to accept influence from the offender? And so I conducted an experimental research design and I crowdsourced a sample of 295 Black men and women. And then they completed a workplace decision-making task, which is a measure of deference. So depending on the condition that they were randomly assigned, they received one of two messages from a fictitious white partner who they thought was real. So if they receive the competency microaggression, they receive the message, they'll probably pick you as the leader because you're Black, LOL. And this is a very common types of comment that Black professionals report experiencing. And they had the opportunity to message their partner back, and in the control, they were told this study is not too bad so far. And so what did I find? So first, I'll talk about responses. I coded the responses in the chat box to whether or not they were more conflict avoidant or not as conflict avoidant. And I found that workers who experienced the competency microaggression were more likely to respond with comments that were more conflict avoidant, like LOL, we will see, or that's quite funny. And so then, did their emotions map onto that? And I found that those who experienced the microaggression reported more negative emotion. So there's this emotional labor in real time. And then they were also less likely to accept influence. And I also looked at how many people end up reporting the microaggression at the end of the study. And I found that only 29% of workers who experienced it actually reported it. And so the implications of my study is that we may think that choosing to not to defer may benefit Black employees, but in the long run, it may harm them because they're not being able to use a rational objective for decision making, and then they also may end up being angry or are labeled angry or difficult to work with. And then on the other hand, showing greater deference may not be a better solution because it ends up leaving microaggressions, those conditions under which they occur, unchallenged. So that's it. I beat the gong.